Thanks, Nicholas. And if I can now introduce Andrew Braddock of the Bath and Bristol Trams Group, he'll be talking about his group's work in promoting light rail initiatives in Bristol and Bath and how they connect with the rail network. Andrew.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to rattle through these slides in hopefully 10 minutes flat, but I will be sending a copy of them to Carol and she can circulate them to you if you want to see more of the detail. Very briefly, a bit about me. I've been more than 50 years involved in public transport. Three things I've highlighted there in yellow. More than 50 years ago, astonishingly, I was involved in running buses in Bristol, ended up with that company as a local manager in Swindon, went back towards my birth area of London, etc., etc. I did a period with the French company Trams, which was in a consortium to build and operate the South Hampshire light rail scheme, one of those sadly killed off by Alistair Darling. But it was a really interesting scheme because it would have removed almost at a stroke more car journeys than any other light rail system in the UK, simply because it cut the corner and the dreadful mess of the M27 getting onto Portsea Island by having a tram go under the river. But that was not to be. And the bottom point is something that I'm very proud of. I've always passionately advocated electric traction, both trams and trolleybuses, neither of which we should have got rid of. What can trams do? They're good for jobs, good for the local economy. Urban public transport employs more than 13 million people worldwide, and it's fairly easy to increase that. It's very interesting if you look at studies, particularly conducted in Germany. Every euro invested in public transport generates 5 to 5.30 of added economic value, and so on. So all of these things are pretty much self-evident. And as Nicholas has said, some places have got on with it much better than we have. The very important point is that a fixed track public transport system, unlike a bus, gives developers and other investors confidence. And that's hugely important when you want to set about renewing your city. In the 20th century, sadly, we gave up on the most sensible form of urban public transport known to man. We followed the Americans, some others, but the Austrians, Belgians, Dutch and Germans, and particularly the Swiss, had the good sense to retain their trams and modernize them. France, which Nicholas has already referred to, but we always need to come back to because it's a very interesting example. It did more or less what we did, except for 3 cities where trams were retained on specialist grounds. But in the 1980s, the central government was particularly concerned about congestion in cities, decline in public transport use, reduced quality of life, etc. And they set up a special unit within the Department for Transport in Paris. Incredible if we could do this in the UK, to knock on the doors of all the cities saying, what are you going to do about this problem of increasing congestion? And that led eventually to the first new tramway in France, in Nantes, which was an instant success. And now there's a 3-line, 42-kilometre network there. The 4th line is almost under construction. Very interestingly, the second new generation system in France brought the new dawn of low floor cars, access for all, probably not until the 1990s in the UK, but in continental Europe, it was an issue from the mid-80s onwards. And it was brilliant that in Grenoble, they introduced the very first low floor trams. Bit of concern about how accessible they could really be. So at the doorways, they had these extending pallets, but eventually it was realized that if you get all the geometry right, you don't need that extra bit of technology. And the great thing about a tram, of course, because it's fixed infrastructure, this absolutely minimum gap between platform and vehicle is achievable at all sets of doors 100% of the time. You can never do that with a bus. Buses will always be impeded by parked vans, parked cars, bicycles, all kinds of things. It's only the tram that can give you this absolutely 100% guaranteed level of perfect access. What they did in France was demand that urban areas with more than 50,000 population produced a plan, which was intended to say How will you reduce congestion? How will you improve public transport, get more people to use it? And the whole theme was involving local consultation, especially with business interests. Once that had gone ahead, the vehicle by which something like a tramway could be constructed was through a déclaration d'utilité publique, which gave any necessary powers, for example, for compulsory purchase of property that was in the way. So the DUP process was all about fixed track, TCSP, types of transport system. There was state subvention available on a reducing scale. It's much smaller now than it used to be, but the bulk of the funding came from a new local taxation called the Versement Transport, which was crudely a payroll tax. All businesses employing more than initially 20 people, now I think it's only 6, pay this tax, and it is a dedicated fund for public transport investment. The rate varies across different parts of the country, and it varies with what's going on. If nothing much is happening, it's quite low, but once a plan has been approved and there's construction going on, say for a new tramway, it increases significantly and then it falls down again. Most importantly, its proceeds are available to subsidise operating costs as well as capital. The mayor is the key figure in all of this. Only one mayor, not two, as you have in and around Bristol. He or she is a key figure in all transport projects. Often, in recent years, has been elected simply because they promised to build or extend a tramway, always acting as the bridge between the states, local authorities, and the consortia under the French system who operate the public transport, always with a very high profile, always visible, and most interestingly, the champion of business involvement. Everything goes through the mayor. The French are beloved of these grand projets types of system, so what you get is a very high quality approach to urban design. Trams are given absolute 100% priority. They have to be very carefully inserted in the existing built environment, lots of consultation, carefully handled. And the contracting is worked on a basis that it's turnkey and the financial risk rests with the public sector. The tragedy in the UK is that we've had lots and lots of bailouts needed because attempts have been made by various governments of all colours to transfer risk to the private sector. Of course you can do that, but the private sector will price up and you end up paying a lot more for something that should be quite cheap. Most importantly, total integration of bus and tram services. One ticket covers everything. Examples of state-of-the-art, you can do some really fancy things when you build a new tramway. This is the northern end of line 2 in Nantes, and this charming looking roundabout with a fountain always reduces to a dribble when a tram comes through. Notice tram 100% priority, the traffic stops for the tram to go through. And it isn't just about trams. Interestingly, every French new tramway has resulted in an increase in bus use because of that integrated tariff and ticketing, but also because the quality has been attended to on the bus side as well. Here in Nantes, you have gas-powered buses, articulated gas-powered buses that provide feeder connections to the trams. New housing developments have been a particular feature of these new French tramways, intelligently designed, laid out in such a way that you have lots of green space. The tracks are laid in grass, very easily accessible between the stops. A lesson for Marvin Rees, who wants an underground: don't do it. If London had its time all over again, I doubt that it would build the underground, because it's a farce that you descend 30 meters to travel half a kilometre and come up 30 meters. You could have walked it quicker. Public transport belongs in the streets. You need to take the cars out of the streets. We're back to Grenoble. Thank you for the introduction, Nicholas. This is a perfect example of how modern tramway is integrated into the cityscape. Of course, there are cars there, but they can't drive along the tram tracks. They come into these parking spaces on the right through side roads that are otherwise cut off. And it's a perfect mix, easy for pedestrians, people who don't see so well. It's no problem because the trams are guided, drivers are well trained to avoid any problems. Effectively, what they've done in in Grenoble and other French cities is to have public transport dominate the streets. The cars have been removed. This is one of the main streets in Grenoble, 2 trams either side at a stop. Along the street, there are bays for deliveries with very restricted access to them, but that's the only other traffic that's allowed in place. You always have an art feature, of course. I've lost count of how many British transport planning documents have got this picture. This is the Homme de Fer, the man of iron, in the centre of Strasbourg. It's completely useless as a shelter against wind or rain, but by God, it's a statement of city planning. And this is where all the main tram lines in Strasbourg cross. Grass tracks, these are a great environmental say-so. It looks the part, it is the part. It also quietens the running, and the track engineers will tell you the rails last longer when they're laid in grass. And here we see the old centre of Strasbourg. This was an awful polluted mess previously, but the tram came along, everything was cleared out. It's easy for cyclists, pedestrians. There is an underground car park in the square to the left, but it's not used a great deal. Everyone uses public transport. Interchange, absolutely critical feature we never quite get right. In the UK, here's a stop on the outer edges of Strasbourg where the bus comes in, stops, as you can see on the left. It's an undercover interchange across to the tram, which is generally waiting when the bus arrives, and off you go, all on one ticket, no problem. The interesting thing about many of these, especially historic cities, is that the way a completely modern tramway has been inserted, starting in 1994, it looks as though it's been there forever. And of course it was in the old days. Then we look at Bordeaux. There's an interesting object lesson here. The mayor of Bordeaux, former Prime Minister Juppé, who therefore knew where the bodies were buried and how to get billions out of central government, went for a pretty expensive ground level power supply system, APS. It's proprietary to Alstom, so he has to buy his trams from Alstom, which is a bit restrictive. It means you don't have overhead wires, but the costs are possibly anything up to 2 times as much as with overhead, and the maintenance costs are maybe 8 times as much, and it doesn't work too well when there's a lot of water around, heavy rain and ice. There were spells in the early days, they've cured them now, where this system completely stopped. And amazingly, even in this environment where you wouldn't have seen poles and wires, they've still got the expensive APS. By contrast, in Orléans, one of the main streets in Orléans, I challenge you all to show me where the wires are, or the poles that support them. Of course, there are no poles because the supporting cross wires for the overhead line is attached to the buildings. The reality, and this is the tough part for politicians, if you're going to do this properly, you have to take road space away from cars. This is the street called Méridiac on the western side of the centre of Bordeaux. And effectively what was a 6-lane road, only a city road, not a motorway, was reduced to 2 traffic lanes, in which, as you can see here at peak times, there's congestion, cars queue. I deliberately took this picture with no trams at all, although it's a very frequent service, to emphasize the point that you can really only do this with a tram. If you took that road space, dedicated it to buses, you'd never stop people driving in it. So it's very important that the tram has a much better way of achieving this. So in 34 years, France has inaugurated 28 systems, average time start to finish about 6 years. We've struggled to build less than a quarter, and it's taken anything up to 20 years. And the lovely thing about this is that municipal pride, which was always stronger in France than it is here. I went to Nice not long after the tramway opened there, and I could not find a postcard to send home that didn't have a tram on it. What are the lessons for us? Autonomy at local level. We need powerful mayors to deliver on election promises. We do need to oblige cities. They have to be told by the Department for Transport, which in this case is generally the Department of Roads, that they must produce a plan to deal with congestion, to deal with environmental issues. Funding streams are very important, whether you have a versement transport, workplace parking levy. Something needs to be done to ensure that funds are collected locally to be spent locally. You need that high quality urban design, insertion into the built environment. Systems must be completely integrated. And of course, we have to be more European and less American. After COVID, traffic congestion is a huge issue. It needs to be attacked. And these are the kinds of things that we need to do. Poor air quality is a huge problem. We have more cities than anyone else breaching the limits. And of course, as has been said earlier, it's absolutely no use converting every car to electric because it's not going to stop people driving. Congestion will still be there. We need to electrify the whole lot. But there's hope for the future. I spend a lot of time talking to young people, what I call Generation Z. It's their future. They're not really interested in car ownership. They're digitally connected. They want everything through their mobile phone, far more likely to travel collectively. They're concerned about the environment, and they're willing, above all, to make sacrifices. Again, Nicholas has mentioned Freiburg, interesting contrast, much more public transport use in Freiburg than in York, similar sized cities, and look at car use. It's less than half in Freiburg. Can we afford a tram system? Remember this, the bitterness of poor quality is rarely exceeded by the sweetness of low price. And my favorite, marry in haste, repent at leisure. In other words, go off and build a hugely expensive Cambridge autonomous metro and then spend years wondering why you wasted the money. HM Treasury will always say you should have a bus because it's cheaper, but they don't understand whole life costs. I've spent 50 years in public transport. The most expensive thing you'll ever have is drivers because you need hundreds, sometimes thousands of them. If you can reduce the number of drivers by having larger capacity vehicles, you will save money. And isn't it worrying that the most recent statement from our government is that they're going to invest £220 million in buses, but 25 billion in roads? Climate crisis? What climate crisis? I'll pass this one quickly. Besançon is the great example of France of doing it more cheaply, but the quality is still there and very good. It's almost the same size as Bath. So if they can do it, so can we. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Without any further ado, I will go on to Gavin, please. If you can start off. Gavin is from Transport for Greater Bristol Alliance, who together with Zero West have developed comprehensive proposals for an integrated network in the Bristol and Bath area. So Gavin, if you can, are you there?
Yeah. Cheers, Rob. Yes, I shan't be showing any illustrations after the two very splendid talks, I might add. And this is a bit more amateurish and a bit more local. Just a bit of history for myself. I used to work as a transport planner for Bristol City Council for about 10 years. Before that, I worked in various other city councils. And if you're a cyclist, which you probably might be, you're meeting one of the 1/3 inventors of the Sheffield stand bicycle stand. So that's my one claim to fame, really, about 40 years ago. Okay, as Rob said, we've no, I was going to ask a question first. It's a bit silly to do this in a Zoom meeting. I was going to ask everybody put up their hands, either physically or mentally, who's seen the trams in a British city, say Edinburgh, Manchester, Sheffield, Nottingham, Birmingham, Croydon, or know about the plans for Cardiff. Right, lots of hands gone up. That's very good. We like, yeah, excellent. Because one of the issues we find when we're talking to people in Bristol is that people sort of say, well, trams, why are you talking about trams? What's the point of them? And they're often quite green people. So it's, you know, so what I was going to ask you to do mentally, don't do it verbally, but do put something in the chat if you want to. Has anybody, any of those who put their hands up saying they've seen a British tram, does any of you think that we shouldn't have them in Bristol? So if any of you think we shouldn't have them in Bristol, just write down in the chat or ask it in the questions the reasons why you think we shouldn't. And then there'll be interesting chat. If you're a cyclist and you think you're going to trip up on the, you know, the tram rails, there's a fantastic video of Ghent, which, like a lot of European cities, has a pretty good tram system. absolutely full of cyclists weaving around all the tracks and so on. So anyway, there are lots of reasons why people don't seem to like trams, but if you have one, just please let us know. As Rob explained, we're public transport focused at Transport for Greater Bristol. We've done, we're now working with Zero West, who are sort of energy focused. And within TFGB, we've done a set of plans. As an ex-transport planner for Bristol, I was pretty fed up just how hopeless Bristol was. So I thought, I've retired, you know, I've got nothing better to do. I'll write a traffic management plan for Bristol, cutting out all the rat runs, which carry about 50% of rush hour traffic. A plan of how you can do that through the road hierarchy. I'll do a parking plan, because if you can't park, you won't drive, and including things like park and ride, but a workplace parking levy and residence parking zones, etc. I'll do one for that. We've already had a bus plan, which has been relatively well received, and that involved not only radial buses, but orbital buses, bus interchanges, feeder buses, trying to find a way of integrating that with community transport, door-to-door stuff. So we've done one of them. And the last one was rapid transit. And it was called rapid transit because, being aware that Metro West exists, which obviously FoSBR is very focused on, and that's where the thought and the planning, and to the extent the money has gone so far, and it's no bad idea, you know, the loop through Clifton down, you know, the one, Avonmouth, Henbury, etc., would be a bloody good idea. Now, hopefully eventually we get it. Reopening the line to Portishead. Yeah, those things will kick off, we hope, rapid transit in Bristol. So Metro West is where it starts, but a lot of corridors won't be improved by that. If you live in Kingswood, it's very little use to you, etc. Most of South Bristol, it's no use to you. So those other corridors within Bristol need something which isn't Metro West, but should be integrated with it. So that's why we ended up focusing on trams. I'm a late comer to trams, even though I used to work in Sheffield, but they had trams after I'd left. And it's only when you've sort of seen a few trams in other cities, mostly in Europe, but sometimes in Britain, you think, bloody hell, you know, these places look like European cities, you know, civilized, clean streets, not many cars around. You go to Utrecht or something, it's like a different world. But okay, so trams do seem to be the answer, and for non-rail corridors, that was the sort of presumption. What we did, we did all these plans. We managed to get a grant for 28,000 quid from the Foundation for Integrated Transport, who are mostly concerned with, I guess, rail to the extent buses, but also housing development, how you integrate public transport with housing, mostly in a rural context. Anyway, they were kind enough to give us 28,000 quid. To further our plans, we employed various people. One of the people we employed is Jim Harkins from the Light Rail Transit Association, who's also a leading light in the cross-party parliamentary light rail group, rapid transit group. I think it's light rail. And he and they have been involved in actually getting trams to happen up and down the country. Well, two countries, because one of them was Edinburgh. Edinburgh, I think Manchester, I think Birmingham. And quite good at the politics of how the hell do you get something to happen. In a place like Bristol, it's harder than it is in other places, but you know, what are the machinations to get something to happen? Anyway, we've taken them on, and we did an outline, a tram plan for Bristol, which pretty much replicated the former tram lines, because Bristol sort of misses its trams. All, you know, White Ladies Road, Bath Road, Wells Road, they're all built around trams. So, you know, you've got this gap in the system. The city was built in the Victorian days around trams, and suddenly they aren't there anymore. So no wonder people are a bit confused and start driving cars. But we did a network. We included a few radical things like a line round the Ring Road, Avon Ring Road, to get East Bristol to Cribbs Causeway and Severside. Another line round South Bristol, the sort of the outer Ring Road there, that sort of busless South Bristol link to get from South Bristol via the Park and Ride on the A370, which you can reach from the A38, and then off to Sevenside. So there's one or two interesting orbital things, but mostly it's radial tram routes. And we asked Jim said to Jim, look, you tell us in your experience, how can we get this thing started? We need a pilot line to kick off. Which one should it be? And just give us a few details from people who know how to build trams. what it should look like. And he's alighted on Gloucester Road, so linking from a park and ride on the M5, coming down, linking in Cribbs Causeway, linking in also Southmead Hospital, then all the way through Bishopston into the city centre, then a city centre loop, which we sort of drew up for him, which he doesn't seem to disagree with. A city centre loop for trams, which is Haymarket, Centre, Baldwin Street, Victoria Street. There might be an issue at Bristol Bridge, Temple Meads, Temple Way, Bond Street. So it's a loop around the city centre. Yeah, there's that map there. You can't see it at this scale, but I assure you it's in there. So he's looking at that city centre loop plus the Gloucester Road line, plus in effect the Bath line as sort of probably the other tail, the most likely thing to get started on, which is handy in a way because Wecker has already had vague plans for a tram line down Gloucester Road. And I think in their system, it ran off the Henbury Loop up at the top and then came down Gloucester Road, which isn't necessarily a daft idea. And they also have a plan for a tram somewhere along the A4 corridor to get to Bath. So Wecker is sort of on board already with our pilot lines, which is not a bad thing. How does this integrate with the rail in practice? Well, you can have interchange stops. The line we had tentatively down to Hengrove Park in South Bristol can interchange both at Parsons Street and Bedminster. The line down Gloucester Road happens to serve the Arena and North Filton station on the Henbury line, as well as the heavy line down the Filton Bank. So that's handy. It also serves, of course, Montpellier station. And then, sorry, I'm flicking through my notes here. Clifton Down is an interchange on the, eventually, if you ever, when we go far enough, if you get a White Ladies Road line to Westbury and so on, we get one at Clifton Down as well. In another way, it links in with tram and rail, basically, is you have hubs where you interchange. I've mentioned those stations. Buses are more, in suburban centres, you can have bus interchanges. So if you live in Fish Ponds or you live in Westbury or Kingswood, you can interchange with the tram in that town centre by a local feeder bus, which only goes to that town centre. It doesn't clutter out the city centre like happens now. You change on integrated ticketing and you get on the tram. We've worked out where the centre should be. Finally, I was going to say the other way the system interlinks is we have this grand concept, which you've already had. I know we haven't done anything about it. We haven't done anything about it, of reopening two or three rail lines. There's the Thornbury Yates line, which in our little map connects then through Yates Station and then goes along the Westerly Freight line underneath the M4, then along what's become a cycleway to reach Emerson's Green on the Avon Ring Road. Then it becomes a road tram route. This would have to be tram train, I think. Along the Avon Ring Road and then down the M32. Using the M32 with a park and ride at the top near the M4 is a basic part of our system. You've got to cut the traffic on, massively reduce the traffic on the M32. So that's another line, reusing Thornbury and Westerly. And the last one is reusing Clevedon to Yatton, actually, to link in there, which is more Metro Westing and not a lot to do with trams. That's probably all I need to say, actually.
Thanks very much, Gavin. That's very interesting and very helpful. I'm aware that timing-wise we are running behind, but I suspect, in view of the lack of nominations for the committee, we may take slightly less time with that. If we can have a few minutes for questions.
I think I had a question, which was in a way, TFGB seem more ambitious about rail than FoSBR because they're actively campaigning for the Clevedon-Yatton link. And I don't know why do FoSBR not do that? Is it because we're concentrating more on the central Bristol area?
Are you asking FoSBR, Carol?
Yeah, I'm asking us, I suppose.
Yes. I don't know, personally. I guess it's something that we've not talked about. I think these areas are important to link to each other. that people in Clevedon, I work with people from that area who obviously commute by car at the moment, and don't have, other than going to Yatton or Nailsea and Backwell, driving there, they don't have public transport options so easily. And I think having a network is something that's really positive. And there's been a theme, I think, of integration, hasn't there, with every speaker, about how important that is. And it strikes me that we've got very little of that. And what integration we have got at places, say, like Clifton Down, where there are buses meeting trains, there's not really anything proactively done to encourage people to go between one and the other.
Okay, Dave Radwell is busting to speak.
Yeah, I just want to say that I know speak from what we are at the Mayor's Transport Board at the moment on the overground, underground proposals, but if I'm honest with you, we're looking more towards Bristol Bath as a corridor and more towards South Bristol, because those are the corridors where the Metro bus is and the corridors that Marvin feels may be convertible. So I think he's looking for more wider urban extension areas where he can put a light rail overground system. And if you talk to him, what he'll tell you is he's got all the housing development in the south of the city, and he's looking, this is around Whitchurch, Hengrove, quite controversial some of it, but very important to housing people in Bristol and the Bristol region. So he's really looking for public transport to serve that. And his big goal is to put public transport in where there is new housing. So I think you'll find any rapid transit system will end up in the Bristol Bath corridor and South Bristol to begin with. That's what I'm picking up from officers and what I'm picking up very strongly from the mayor, if he gets re-elected, of course.
And David, that's what seems to fit with what's been said in the previous plans about transport along Bath Road and Bristol Bath. I wonder whether, seeing as how we are short of time, whether we can come back to this in the discussion. So, and